welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, guys, you do recognize my voice. It's always Rosie here, and as I've said many times, this is just a group of students and young professionals who are very interested in anything that has to do with technology and, yes, it's regulation. So, guys, I have to tell you, this is a great moment, not just because incredible, but you can see me connected on a call at this time, but also because we are calling someone who is actually in the United States and he's still alive. Great, well done. So, going back to the conversation, I have to tell you that today I am joined by my great colleague and friend, Gaia Giraudo, who is also one of the producers of the podcast. Great to see you, Gaia.
Thank you so much, Rosie. Hi, everyone.
Hi, and today you are joining me because we are interviewing someone who is actually calling us, as I said, from the United States. He's a friend of the podcast already, I decided that, and he's a fellow Italian. Hello, Claudio Novelli. Great to see you.
Hi, great to see you, and thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to actually have you on the pod. And yeah, it's been quite difficult to find the right time to meet. But actually, I am so delighted and so grateful that we actually managed because, I mean, you're doing something incredible. As I mentioned, you are in the US. So tell our listeners something about yourself, of course. And I mean, why are you so far away from Italy?
Oh, that's a good question. Can we start with an easier one? But yeah, no, the point is that I'm an associate research scientist now at the Digital Ethics Center at Yale University. That's the main reason I'm here, the only reason I'm here. And about myself, like many people with my kind of research profile, my background is pretty mixed, I would say. So I graduated from the University of Law of Bologna, the Bologna Law School, which I miss very much. But pretty quickly, I got fascinated by the idea that law is basically a form of practical reasoning with a ton of philosophical assumptions hiding under the, let's say, the technicalities. And so since then, I mean, I started studying philosophy and more specifically legal philosophy, which is still what I do right now. And since philosophy, I mean, a big move in philosophy is exactly like pulling back, let's say, the curtain, and asking what's really going on here. Um, and that's why many philosophers were called like the masters of suspicion. Someone like people like Freud, Marx, and so on. I started paying more attention to what is like implicit in legal thinking and where, let's say, certain conventions actually come from. Why do we think that? Why, let's say, property as one of our legal concepts work the way it does? But also, when do we decide that an entity deserves some kind of rights or duties, which is one of the fields I've specialized in. So the concept of legal personhood, to be more explicit about that. When do we decide that something counts as proven in court? All these kind of questions are part of, let's say, legal philosophy or a philosophical approach to law and legal theory. And so I gradually I shifted towards this field, legal philosophy, first doing my a master where I work on presumptive reasoning in law and specifically in tax law, and then more during my PhD. The name of the PhD program, which was at the University of Bologna, was Law, Science, and Technology. And so I start, as you may guess from the, let's say, from the name of the PhD program, I started combining a more theoretical approach to law with questions coming from emerging technologies. And that's why I'm now studying and researching a lot on ethics of digital technologies, regulation of digital technologies, and of course, let's say, the master technology in this a specific time of our lives, which is artificial intelligence. But not only that, platform governance, and in this moment, I'm very fascinated by simulation technologies. So digital twins, digital shadows, but also synthetic populations, LLM-based simulation, all these kind of things. So this was I don't know if it's satisfying as a response, but it is kind of a introduction of myself.
It's a great overview, and I have to say, you are probably the first ever person who managed to put in the same sentence tax law and philosophy.
I'm
Was
aware.
I mean, you conquered me anyways. That was a shock to me to hear. And less shocking, I have to say, is the idea that when we talk about the digital world, which is something that is kind of like away from us, away from our um living state in the real world, but it's actually within us if we think about how it's done. It's not so strange to think about digital world and think about philosophy, philosophical questions, the essence of being inside, outside, whatever it is, and of course, ethics. So, in this kind of context, you have now landed in the United States, as we said, at the Digital Ethics Center of the University of Yale. What is it? Why did you go there? And what kind of projects are you leading? Are you working within? Which kind of put together the context of law and the context of philosophy?
Yeah, no, the Digital Ethics Center is I mean, Luciano Floridi founded the center in 2023, if I don't get wrong. And the goal, the explicit goal, the very explicit goal was studying governance, ethical, legal, and social implications of digital innovation. Sometimes this is called the GELSI or GALSI, it really depends on your taste. I joined in 2025 as a postdoc, and now I am, let's say, part of the center and the faculty. Um, the center has pretty broad research agenda. The team is intentionally built to be very diverse, and so that's why we got people coming from computer science, coming from economics, coming from comparative politics, engineering, even you name it, basically. And what is really, I would say, um, exciting about the center, and it's a big difference with my previous experience as a researcher, as a PhD student, is that we try a lot to bring students into the mix, and which is why we offer opportunities and funding to undergrads and also graduate students who have like original disruptive ideas and want to develop them with us at the center, which is something that as a student in Italy, it was pretty unconceivable. Also, as a PhD student, sometimes you are left alone and you're not giving any kind of credit about when it comes to develop research ideas. And it's a great mistake because researcher graduate students, undergrads, they have sometimes great research ideas. They just don't have probably the methodology. They don't know how to develop them properly, and that's why we are here basically. So these this very diverse environment and very mixed environment is reflected in the research areas of the center, which span from video games, cybersecurity to AI integration into healthcare and so on. What I'm dealing with, I'm working on so many different projects. As I mentioned before, one of the projects I'm more, let's say, um, immersed in is how to use simulation technologies to improve some social processes.
Um,
Yeah, please.
when you talk about simulation technology, I am pretty sure that many of the listeners, essentially like me, will be thinking of the Matrix. Would you mind explaining exactly what it is and like, do we have to get a blue pill or a red pill, or can we just like follow your research and kind of learn from it?
Oh, well, you can get the blue pill, the red pill, as you wish, but it's the concept is very simple. In social sciences, and not only in social sciences, we have always used simulations as a methodology, let's say, to create some environments where we can test our hypothesis about the world. So traffic, behavior of rational agents, behavior of political parties, behavior of this and that. We, when we cannot observe these behaviors and events in real world, we build a model where we simulate agents' behavior or events. It really depends on the, let's say, technique you're using. So that's the simulation. And uh, of course, you can build a very basic and very analogous simulation, analogical, sorry, simulation model, but you can also use digital technologies for doing that. So you can use what is now called a digital shadow or a digital twin, which is a replica of a system, a replica of an existent physical or social system, to study its behavior and to study how changing the conditions affect the system in itself. Social researchers have long talked about agent-based modeling, for instance. So um, we build an environment with several agents which are supposed to replicate the behavior of human beings and see what happens. It's basically, let's say, it's like having a laboratory for social scientists where you can look into the microscope, you can isolate things and study them to prove a point, to prove an argument, to prove an hypothesis. That's the goal. That's the point of simulations.
And you mentioned the concept of digital twins.
Yeah.
I have two questions to ask you. The first one is, can you explain the concept? Like, what is a digital twin? How is it trained? How does it look like? And the second one, most important, do you have one?
I have one of myself. I wish I had one of myself. Mm. It will be very useful to have a digital twin. You can send him to the post office. You can send him to meetings you don't want to attend. You can send it to all kind of gatherings that are very boring. You can send him to work when you don't want to work. Yeah, that would be perfect. A digital twin is so let me a digital twin is a replica of a system, as we said, a social or physical system. Of course, replicating a physical system is way easier than replicate a social system in terms of complexity. Um, it's very important, I think, to differentiate between a digital shadow, a digital, let's say, a model of something, a digital shadow, and a digital twin. And I can give you a very basic example. If you think about a map, a geographic map of a country or of a city or something, that's a model of the object you're observing. That's the model, let's say, of a city. The map of a city is a model of the city, which means that it's not updated with the changing in the real system. It's not that, of course, you're very young and you cannot really remember about this, but we used to drive using paper maps, and if there was like an interrupted road, the physical map, let's say the paper map, would not advise, would not show the change in the physical system. So that's a model which is let's say it's based on the reality, but it's disconnected. It's not updated with data from reality. Google Maps is kind of a digital shadow because it replicates the physical system, it replicates the city, and also it's updated from data with the data from the real city. So if you ask Google Map to calculate the route for a certain destination, it will tell you it will take like 30 minutes because these are the traffic conditions, because this is the time you're moving, and etc., etc., etc. That's a digital shot. It is updated with data from reality, from the physical system, and through sensors and through different tools. A digital twin is even more because the relation is not unidirectional. It's not from the physical system to the digital model, but it's bidirectional, which means that once you receive the data from the physical system, the replica has an effect on the reality. So what does it mean? It means that think about a self-driving car. A self-driving car which uses Google Map. What happens is that I ask the car to calculate the route to a certain destination. The destination is calculated based on the data from traffic, for instance. And based on that calculation, the self-driving car has, let's say, the self-driving car takes the route. So takes a decision and acts based on that information. The fact that it's not only an update of information, but it also has an effect, a concrete effect on reality, and the system behaves according to that information, makes it a digital twin. The digital twin must have this bi-direction. It's not just a model, but it's also the enforcement of something based on the model information. So there is a concrete actions that is taken.
Okay, I understand. How do digital twins understand if you've had a change of heart? For example, like, do I have to tell digital twin that I don't like specific food anymore, for example, or if I try something new, how does it know that the reality around it has changed? Um, are digital twins supposed to be brought with the person? How does it work? And like also, how does the digital twin then differ from an agent? Because you did make the distinction earlier, but it wasn't very clear. And I think many people are thinking of AI agents. Maybe the concept digital twins is not yet embedded in the kind of like general narrative. So if you could make that distinction and explain how then the digital twin remains faithful to its human twin.
Well, that's the point, what you just mentioned. It's a point of faithfulness. An AI agent can be very unfaithful, can be very, so it's at the end of the day, it's a distinction in terms of empirical grounding. The digital twin is very grounded on empirical data, while AI agents can be quite disconnected from empirical data, and they don't reproduce exactly an individual human being. If you look at the, for instance, large language models, they can reproduce some statistically occurring features. They can talk like a human being. They can conversate like a human being, but they are not really able. And there is a bit of literature on that. There is a lot of evidence on that. They cannot really replicate a specific human being. They are very capable of, let's say, replicating an average human being. The digital twin is different. The digital twin is supposed to be grounded on very robust empirical data. And the reproduction is not the reproduction of an average persona, it's not the reproduction of an average behavior or average opinions. It's supposed to reproduce quite exactly what happens in a physical or social system. Now, as I said, digital twins have been used a lot in engineering because, of course, replicating a bridge or an airplane, it's kind of easier than in terms of complexity than replicating a human being or even a group of human beings, which are way more unpredictable, way more differentiated. They don't, let's say, react just to physical laws. They react to many different rules, regularities, habits, conventions, moral values, all these kind of things that we study. So it's a great challenge. it's not easy. Your question was about how can we ensure that there is this kind of connection between real human beings and the digital twins. Um, I'm not that confident that we can do that right now. Of course, there are some, let's say, biological and yeah, let's say biological traits of our existence that are more easy to monitor than others. So if you want to, there are some studies about replicating the heart of a human being as a digital, so building a digital twin of your heart. But that's way more mechanical, the way your heart pumps blood than how you decide whether to buy meat or fish for dinner. So it really depends on what it means, on what we mean when we talk about human agents. Are we considering their social behaviors there, or are we just using and thinking about using digital twins for healthcare purposes? Probably for healthcare purposes is kind of, but I don't want to make a very strong claim, but it's kind of easier than with um, chaotic social behaviors.
That's a very interesting and insightful explanation that you made there. Because we, as you may know from listening to our episodes of Legal for Tech, some of us are data lawyers, some of us are very interested in the topic of personal data. The European Union is all about the GDPR anyway, so my fundamental question here before some of our listeners text me like, what the hell, why did you not ask that? What kind of data is a digital twin trained upon, and how extensive does the data set need to be for a digital twin to work not perfectly, but decently enough for it to be fruitable and kind of connected to the idea of digital twin itself? In short, what kind of data does it need to be an actual digital twin by its definition?
The amount of data is extensive, and that's why of the big concerns. It's not a very convenient, it's not a very, let's say, computationally speaking, is not a cheap technology. Um, that's why sometimes people suggest to have not digital twins who are exact reproductions of social or physical systems, but to, let's say, kind of build statistical plausible digital twins instead of exact replicas of systems. The data, it really depends on what you're using the digital twin for. They can be, if you're interested in social interactions and, for instance, conversations or political opinions, you can use, of course, demographic data, but also, for instance, social media interactions data. You can monitor and you can build agents based on the way they conversate and they form their opinion on social media. It's very noisy, of course, needs a lot of calibration validation, but you can do that.
In that regard, of course, you're working on digital twins in the specifics of their use in democratic debate. Of course, that's one of the projects you're working on, and one of the contents of a paper you've been publishing, quite, if I'm not mistaken, in July 2025. I was wondering though, if you're using a lot of social media data, a lot of people are very worried that social media are excessively polarizing, not to say that they use content, especially some social media. And yes, let me mention it, X, I'm talking about X. Some of them have the issue of being, for example, using kind of content that is not even legal. I mean, and Perry's main prosecutor is kind of proving my words here because, of course, they're running an investigation into X because of the Holocaust denialism, which is illegal in France. So the issue is, even if you're using them as a plausible explanation of the society around us rather than the specific persona, the specific Rosalia or the specific Claudio, if you're training them on data that is flawed and biased and potentially illegal and potentially extremely polarizing by definition, aren't you scared that the society that you're going to map out is a society that is more problematic than the one that we probably have?
Well, there are two ways to address this very important point that you raised. I do agree that social media data are very noisy and they can be very biased because, as you said, you find very polarized opinions on social media. And you can find, for instance, sometimes very aggressive behavior, a form of let's say, aggressiveness, which is not typical and it's not normal in, let's say, real life contexts. So the data that you collect may be very biased and very noisy. For this reason, you need to have a lot of like safeguards, guardrails, and whatever. So of course you cannot use some social media like X, not only because people are fucking crazy there, but also because it's full of AI bots in this moment. There are many AI agents. There is Grok, which interacts with uh, did I say something which I no, okay. I saw you like
We have
um
an ongoing dispute with Grok because, as our listeners may know, the girls on this in this group and on this podcast are particularly annoyed at what's happening with Grok AI and the beginnified version of people. So that's why we don't particularly enjoy using Grok in the specific moment, but I'm sure that they will make some changes eventually. I'm sorry, just to clarify why I made that face.
no, it's very fair point. Twitter, X, so do you want to call it? It's a battlefield, and I don't think it's the social media we should consider. But there are many other social media which are less noisy and less corrupted by AIs, and there are also some social media that are specifically intended for political confrontation and political deliberation. So probably starting from there because data will be less biased, less noisy, and so on. Second, we need to clarify what are we using these simulations for, because you're raising a good point. Why should we trust on these systems, right? And I think we shouldn't, basically. But we should use them as a form of beta testing of some inquiry and research that we want to deepen later. Is basically like using guinea pigs when you want to test a new drug or a new medical procedure or something. You don't start from humans, of course, because of the risks, because sometimes you don't even know what you are exploring, so you are very like inattentive. Of course, there are like ethical guidelines also for the use of guinea pigs in research. And I think that we should have ethical guidelines for the use of simulation technologies in research as well. But my point is that the difference in terms of, let's say, the ontological difference between guinea pigs and human beings does not justify, and that is not a sufficient reason for not using guinea pigs at all. A very famous statement, a very famous quote in this area is, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And I think this very concise statement is basically my response.
And so, just to make it clearer for our listeners, in general, the type of use that you advocate for in the case of digital twins is mostly, if not only, for research purposes. So to understand societies, to kind of like deal with like the movements, the thoughts, the bigger kind of changes of ideas. Um, you wouldn't really support the idea that a commercial company, so let's say that let's call a couple here just because, let's say Gemini, let's say of course Google, let's say OpenAI, you wouldn't support one big company creating a commercial version of digital twin for people to use like ChatGPT or like Meta AI and deploy in the real world to avoid going to work or to go to the post office. That's not what you're looking at, right?
I'm looking at the use of simulations for research purposes. I haven't thought deeply about the commercial use of digital twins for. I know that there is a big, a big commercial use of these simulation technologies is in warfare. So I didn't think deeply about like the uses that you're mentioning, like building a digital twin of yourself to avoid going to the post office or the. I'm not ideologically against that. I just didn't think about the ethical consequences and implications of that kind of use. But yeah, I'm not even supporting the use of digital twins as exact replicas, to be fair. I'm supporting the use of some form of simulation, which can be based on a digital shadow, digital twin, or synthetic population, or even LLM-based simulation, um, which is kind of like a generalization. So it's statistically plausible. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be so precise that we can recognize Claudio Novelli in the model or Rosalia Anna D'Agostino in the model. We don't need that. Also for privacy concerns. And you, as you are way more lawyers than I am, can see the point, right? So, for instance, in the paper that you mentioned, we started asking, where could AI-based simulation um, actually be useful in improving, let's say, our society, to put it very humbly. Um, and one of the big problems we were interested in was deliberative democracy. So participatory settings where people aren't just voting, but debating, exchanging reasons, and defending their positions once they've been given the relevant information about the topic to be deliberated on. And of course, the ideal outcome of in deliberative settings is the most robust arguments wins out. It's not just the politically convenient or best marketed argument to win, like like often what happens in traditional representative politics. So there are people exchanging views and ideas and debating, and they really genuinely want their argument to win. But these deliberations to work well, for these deliberations to work well, the procedural rules matter a lot. So who gets to speak, in what order, how moderation works, how discussion rounds are structured, and so on and so on and so on. So the problem is often you don't really know which design works better in deliberative settings until you are already in the middle of a real discussion. So to avoid this, to let's say optimize this a bit, we thought the simulation could help. So you could test different rule designs, almost like running pilot deliberations to see what kinds of dynamics they produce. And so that's where the idea came in, a form of digital shadow, or if you prefer, a digital twin. It really depends on how it is enforced, with multiple AI agents acting as participants or as moderators in a deliberative community. And the goal is to help designers make better choices about which procedural rules to adopt um, in order to produce an healthier debate, of course, and without going to the real context, because going to the real deliberation is, of course, a mess, and you risk invalidating all your hypotheses. A better way for doing that is, at least as a pilot, as a beta testing, is to go on a simulation context, go in your simulated deliberative community in your lab and starting from there. But we're not saying that we should substitute, and this is very important. We should not substitute the real deliberative community with the simulated one. We need the real one. We just can test some initial assumptions. So a designer, for instance, might discover that a certain composition of groups, or even a certain way of splitting discussion rounds creates a dominance effect that shut down the debate or that systematically, let's say, sidelines some viewpoints, and you don't want that. So to avoid that, you don't need to, I mean, you need, but in an initial phase, when you are still a little bit confused about the design, you can just use a simulation mode. That's our point. Is that clear?
Absolutely. And it's so clear that I'm going to, for a second, play devil's advocate, which is, again, something we like doing in the pod. Brace yourself. Um, the question that I would like to ask you is the following. I mean, as you said, this kind of technology is great. It's super cool. Of course, we like to talk about it on the podcast. But as you said, it's very data intensive. And of course, we know that data intensiveness tends to mean that it's also very kind of weighty on the environment, on the price of electricity, of energy that it takes to power these models is something that we do not think about enough. And of course, environmentalism versus innovation, that's a huge topic of debate that maybe you can discuss in one of your simulations. But I would like to know, is it really worth it to have all of this technology going kind of like to find solutions for procedural rules that then have to be kind of anyways imposed on humans? Can't you just put a group of people in a room and see how it goes, offer them some teas and biscuits and kind of see how they go? Isn't that cheaper?
I'm not sure it's cheaper, because gathering people is not easy. So you may run some many tentative, let's say, group interactions. It can be deliberative community, as we were saying, but also can be focus groups, whatever you want. But first of all, gathering people is quite expensive, and sometimes you really have suboptimal decisions because you may reach only specific people who have a lot of free time, spare time, and they can come and participate, join your experiments. Sometimes you are biased by the fact that these people are very politically oriented, and maybe sometimes you don't want that. So there are some costs, I would say, there are some inherent costs in real world experiments that you can, at least when you are very uncertain about your research question, or as we were saying, procedural design of a certain interaction. I think that especially if you don't use a digital twin, which is the most expensive simulation technique, it's still reasonable. And I don't know, actually, I've never wondered much about the environmental impact of this. I'm sure that there is an environmental impact in moving people around and collecting people. An interesting intermediate digital solution would be to have some virtual focus groups or virtual deliberative communities, which means that you're connecting people through the internet and not physically anymore. That solves a lot of problems in terms of logistics, of course. It doesn't in terms of like people who participate and people who um, who actually have time to join your experiment. So there are some, let's say, segments. There are some fat fractions of the society that you cannot really involve in experiments, and then maybe you can understand better if you have a model of how they behave or how they form their opinions and so on.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe this is a topic to kind of look at in the future. Who knows if digital twins become the kind of reality, the everyday kind of go-to for policymakers, for political decision makers, rather than just, a very interesting project that's going on in Yale, but for now, it's kind of limited to your reality, of course. It's like you're pioneering a new type of approach to technology and living in society. Um, the last question that I really think it's important to ask, because it's something that, we kind of see everywhere on LinkedIn and people talking about it, is the fact that anything that has with technology tends to develop some specific type of behaviors. There's the problem of hallucinations, but there's also the problem of sycophancy. Um, what kind of methods do you deploy to avoid the downsides, not just of the interaction of technology, but literally of the technology itself?
So I'm not a computer scientist. I cannot really elaborate on this point. What I can say is that, of course, there is a risk of hallucinations, sycophancy, you name it. I mean, it's especially when you're using simulation techniques who that deploy a lot of large language models. Um, and sycophancy specifically is very problematic when it comes to simulations. It can be a big deal because it can completely of course, I'm giving for granted that we know what we're talking when we're talking about sycophancy. I'm sure that your audience in this podcast is very educated and cultured. Yeah. Um, um, but yeah, in a simulation context, it can be a sycophancy can be a big deal because it's as I was saying, it distorts, can distort the output. The agents end up mirroring the prompter assumptions, the prompter goal, and the biases, and sometimes even they even amplify them. Um, this is something that sometimes is called observer bias and is not unique to simulations. It happens actually also in real context and real experiments. So for instance, in real deliberations, we can have an observer bias. But since the whole point of a controlled simulation is to reduce this kind of distortion, of course, we should find some solutions and we should work on way to fix this problem. There are, as I said, I'm not a computer scientist. I know a bit of literature about that. I know that there are ways to mitigate these kind of problems. So, for instance, when you specifically for what regards sycophancy, but some of these solutions are applicable also to hallucinations. You can constrain outputs more tightly to facts and to sources. You can force models to signal uncertainty and to signal and be more explicit about this form of uncertainty. When you ask them something, they are more, let's say, honest in telling you, okay, this is something I don't really have many information about, instead of bluffing. And you can also rebalance the system so it produces more adversarial and critical thinking style responses rather than a default agreement, which is what happens every time that we talk about sycophancy. So there are ways. There are technical and non-technical ways to adjust sycophancy and hallucinations as well. Hallucination is the product of a is the result also of a very high temperature, what is called temperature of an AI system. So it's capacity to be creative and to go beyond the input, the prompt. Um, the point, I think, at the end of the day is since we have, let's say, some technical safeguards and some way to mitigate these problems, the real point is here the incentives and what is the commercial motivation let's say, what is a reasonable commercial way to reduce sycophancy? Why do we have sycophantic AI systems, right? I guess that it's having less sycophantic AI system is not really commercially speaking, not really interesting, is not really intriguing. Because a less sycophantic AI model, a less sycophantic large language model can look less helpful, less flexible, maybe even less creative. I mean, for sure, less creative. And so some people may not be interested in that kind of systems. I think that in some contexts, that's fine. So, for instance, or even desirable. A physician using an LLM or a lawyer using an LLM really appreciate having a more boring AI system, not very creative, but more precise and more like uncertain. Um, but in other fields, if you think about, I don't know, or art or any kind of creative job, maybe that's not what people are looking for. Uh, so it's really, I think, at the end of the day, an issue of incentives. Sorry.
I love that answer. And really, to conclude this great conversation, our listeners will find the link to the paper we referred to in our show notes, of course. Before we let you go, what's next? You've published one paper, and are we expecting something to come out soon? Can you spoil that for us a tiny bit?
Of course, publish or perish. It's. No, I'm kidding. Publish or perish is what is destroying academia. So re try not to do that. We are all kind of guilty, and again, it's a matter of incentives. Anyway, on the simulation side, since our conversation was based on that, we are writing down, and it's about to be ready, a paper on how to simulate focus groups for political parties. So political parties use focus groups to sometimes base their electoral campaign or their party strategy, and they use their voters, their people from their electorate, or sometimes even people from another electorate to see and uh, to understand how it lands a certain message, a certain campaign strategy, and so on. And so we are studying and we are thinking about what happens when these focus groups are not made of real people and real voters, but some form of simulated agent, if that is useful for political parties. And if that's the case, what's the way to integrate simulated focus group in a political party strategy? So we are working on a stepwise protocol, integration protocol. That's a project that we have. And then the other project that I really like, the other paper that will be published in the coming, I would say, 2 weeks or even before, is a paper about how our imagination shape AI regulation. So the way we think through metaphors, through image schemas, through metonymies and other kind of other form of tropes affect not only our understanding of AI, but also the way we regulate it. And it's a project that I really love because it's connected to the book that I recently published. And in general, I'm really interested in understanding better the role of imagination and creative thinking in law. So somehow we are pushing back all those scholars and people who are trying to use a very reductionist vocabulary and reductionist terminology when it comes to talk about AI and regulate AI. Of course, the more precise you are, the better, but sometimes, especially when a context is new, a technology is new and is very complex, the way our language works and the way our categorization practices work is very imaginative. We use metaphors, and we should be aware that we use metaphors in this way. No one thinks that when astrophysics talk about black holes, it's really a black hole. We know that. We just need to pick the right metaphor, the right trope, and understand how to use it. So the paper is kind of we are addressing some metaphors very common in the AI field. So first of all, why we use intelligence as AI, why we're using a black box, and why we are talking about more recently about hallucinations. Those are the metaphors that we are criticizing, partly criticizing and trying to understand better in that paper.
Wow, I'm really, really interested in reading this content, and I hope you will get in touch with us so that we can get in touch with our listeners and let them know the title and the time of publication, because it sounds just like the type of stuff they will love reading, before discussing the point that the law only needs to be categorical. And it's actually a very interesting point to make. So I will now say thank you to you, Claudio. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. And thank you, Gaia, who is still here. I promise she's been here the whole time. Hi, Gaia.
Oh, Gaia.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you so
so much. Claudio, thank you so much, Rosie, as always. You're incredible, really. Also, Claudio.
I'm gonna cut
I really
this one.
loved it.
And this was all from Legal for Tech, the podcast.
This episode was brought to you in partnership with DG Beetle. DG Beetle helps privacy professionals to stay up to date with the most important European documents in the AI, data and digital space every day. Curious to know more? Check out the link in our show notes.